Ben Grinder Kovac was a man who felt most at home when the world was a blur of gray road, and the only sound was the steady, powerful heartbeat of his motorcycle engine. For years, his family had been the men he rode with, his brothers in the club. They had a code, a way of life, and it was all he really knew. But life has a way of changing on you. A few years back, his old life had sort of cracked in two. His marriage ended. It was messy and quiet at the same time. The biggest piece left from that old life was his son, a boy who was now 12 years old. The boy lived with his mother in a small, tidy town that felt a million miles away from the roar of the highway and the smoke-filled clubhouse. There were rules now. Rules set by a judge and rules set by his ex-wife. He could see his son, but it had to be scheduled, proper, and clean. No showing up in his colors. The leather vest that told the world who he was. No talk about club business. It was like he had to put the biggest part of himself in a box just to be a dad for an afternoon. It hurt, but he did it. For his boy.so. Their connection became these little islands of time. A phone call every Sunday night was the main one. Just 15 minutes to hear about school, about video games, about nothing and everything. It was the most important appointment in Grinder's week. He'd find a quiet spot, away from the noise of the brothers, and just listen to that young voice. That's why he knew something was wrong. The Sunday came and went, and his phone never rang. At first, he thought maybe the boy was just busy, out with his mom. He sent a text, "Hey, you okay?" Missed our call. No answer. Monday morning, still nothing. Another text, "Just checking in." The silence on the other end felt heavy, and a cold feeling started growing in Grinder's stomach. This wasn't like his son. The boy was good about this, about their time. The worry chewed at him all through a club meeting Monday night. The brothers were talking about runs and mechanics and the usual things, but Grinder's mind was somewhere else. He kept seeing the boy's face. Was he sick? Hurt? Or was it something else? The not knowing was the worst part. He decided he couldn't just wait. On Tuesday, he told the guys he had an errand to run. He didn't say what. He climbed onto his motorcycle, that familiar rumble between his legs. But this time it didn't bring its usual comfort. He rode across town, from the industrial side where his world was, to the side with clean sidewalks and big trees. He parked his bike a block away from the middle school. He knew showing up at the front office in his vest would cause a scene, and that was the last thing his son needed. So he walked around to the back, near the chain-link fence that separated the schoolyard from the street. The kids were out for recess. It was a chaos of shouting and running. He leaned against the fence, his eyes scanning the crowd. Took a minute, but then he saw him. His boy was over by the far wall of the gym, near the dumpsters. He wasn't playing. He was just standing there, and he wasn't alone. 3 bigger kids had him cornered. Grinder's body went still. His eyes, used to seeing trouble before it happened, saw the whole story. He saw one of the bigger kids snatch his son's backpack and dump it on the ground. He saw another kid say something, his face mean and laughing, and give his son a hard shove against the shoulder, making him stumble. His son didn't shove back. He just looked down at his shoes. His shoulders slumped. This wasn't the first time. You could tell by the way his son took it, like it was just something he had to endure. The bell rang, and the kids scattered, the bullies swaggering away. His son slowly picking up his books alone. Grinder stood there, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. A fire was burning in his chest now, hotter than any engine. This was the reason for the silence. This was the hurt. And as he turned to walk back to his bike, one thought was clearer than anything. The school had let this happen. They had to have seen it, and they did nothing. The cold worry was gone, replaced by a promise he made to himself right then and there. This was not going to stand. The ride back from the schoolyard was a blur of anger and noise. The engine's roar, usually a comfort, now matched the storm in his head. He didn't go back to the clubhouse. He needed to think, to plan, without the brothers asking questions just yet. He rode until he found an old, quiet diner on the edge of town, a place where the coffee was bitter and nobody looked twice at a man in a leather cut. He sat in a corner booth, his large hands wrapped around a mug he didn't drink from. He replayed the scene at the fence over and over. The shove, the dumped backpack, The look on his son's face. Not even anger, just a tired kind of defeat. That was what killed him the most. The boy had already given up. How long had this been going on? A week? A month? The missed call made sense now. His son was probably ashamed, or maybe he just didn't have the words to tell him. He pulled out his phone, the screen feeling small and useless in his hand. He texted his ex-wife. It had to be direct. "We need to talk. About Danny. It's important. Can we meet tonight?" He used the boy's name, knowing it was the only key that would work. The reply took 20 long minutes. "Fine. My place. 7 p.m. Don't bring your friends." He didn't respond. He just paid for the coffee he never touched and went back out into the AIR.at exactly 7. He pulled up to the tidy house in his truck, not the bike. He changed into a plain black t-shirt, though the tattoos on his arms and neck still told their own story. His ex-wife opened the door before he could knock. Her face was tight, arms crossed. She didn't let him past the front step. "What's this about, Ben? Is this more of your drama?" He kept his voice low, calm. "It's about our son. I went by the school today. At recess." He saw a flicker in her eyes, a quick shift from defiance to worry. "I saw 3 older kids. They had him cornered. They shoved him, dumped his stuff. This isn't new, is it?" She looked away, out towards the quiet street. Her shoulders sagged a little. "He's mentioned some trouble. Boys picking on him. I told him to tell the teacher. I called the school counselor last week." "And?" Grinder asked, already knowing the answer. "And she said she'd look into it. That boys will be boys sometimes," she said. She said with Danny's home situation, he might be feeling sensitive, might be misunderstanding things. The words hit him like a physical blow. Home situation. A polite way of saying your father is an outlaw biker, so what do you expect? The school wasn't just ignoring it. They were blaming his son for it. "He's not misunderstanding someone shoving him," Grinder said, his voice harder now. "I saw it with my own eyes. I need to talk to him." She hesitated, the old fears and arguments right there between them. But the mother in her won out. "Okay, but be gentle. He's been very quiet." His son was in his room, sitting on the bed with a video game controller in his hands, but the screen was just on the menu, idle. He looked up when Grinder came in, and his eyes went wide for a second before filling with a look the father knew too well, dread. "Hey, kid," Grinder said, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "I was in the neighborhood today. Thought I'd see if you were at school." His son just nodded, looking back at the blank TV screen. "I saw you, out by the gym," Grinder continued softly. "I saw those other guys." A tear escaped then, rolling down his son's cheek, and he wiped it away angrily, as if being caught crying was another failure. The whole story came out in broken pieces. The names they called him, the stolen homework, the tripping in the hall, the time they put his gym shoes in the toilet. He told the vice principal, a man named Mr. Brackett, twice. The first time, the man said he'd have a word. The second time, he'd sighed and said, "You need to learn to toughen up, son. Not everyone is going to be nice to you. You have to deal with it." Grinder listened, and with every word, the cold, hard plan forming in his mind took sharper shape. This wasn't about a couple of schoolyard bullies anymore. This was about the people who were paid to protect his child and had instead given his tormentors permission to continue. They saw the boy's last name and decided he was the problem. He put a heavy hand on his son's shoulder. "Look at me." The boy did, his eyes red. "This stops. Now, you didn't do anything wrong. You hear me? This is on them. And I'm going to fix it." "How?" his son whispered, a tiny spark of hope in the word. Grinder almost smiled, but it wasn't a happy look. "You let me worry about that. You just keep your head up. Your dad's got this." He left the house a few minutes later, the quiet suburban street feeling like enemy territory. He got into his truck but just sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. Going in and threatening some vice principal would feel good for 5 minutes. Then his son would pay the price, labeled a snitch with a crazy father. No, this needed to be bigger. It needed to be so clear, so undeniable, that the school could never look away again. He started the engine. It was time to talk to his other family. The clubhouse was not quiet. The thump of a pool game, the low rumble of conversation, and the smell of old leather and engine grease hit him as soon as he walked in. It was usually a sound that meant he was home. Tonight it was just noise. He walked past a couple of the younger guys, nodding briefly, but his face was a closed door. They saw it and left him alone. He went straight to the back, to the small, cluttered office where the chapter president sat, doing the books. The man was older, his beard more gray than black, his eyes sharp. He looked up as Grinder filled the doorway. "Grinder, you look like you rode through a thundercloud." "I need the floor," Grinder said, his voice flat. "At church." Church was what they called their official meetings. It was serious business. The president studied him for a long moment, then closed his ledger. "All right, we were about to start anyway." 10 minutes later, the main room was cleared of hangers-on. Only the patched members, the full brothers, were there. About 20 men sat around on old couches and chairs. The president gavelled the meeting to order with a bottle of soda on the table. They went through the usual business first: upcoming runs, bike maintenance, the dull but necessary stuff. Grinder sat through it, silent, his fists clenched on his knees. Finally, the president looked his way. Grinder's got something to say. Every eye in the room turned to him. These were hard men. They'd seen trouble, they'd made trouble, they lived by a code that most of the world didn't understand. But they were also, in their own way, fathers, uncles, brothers. Grinder stood up. For a second, the words stuck in his throat. Club business was one thing. This was different. This was his heart, raw and outside his body. "It's about my boy," he started, and the room got even quieter. "His mother's got him. You know that. He's a good kid. Quiet. Smart." He swallowed, looking at the worn concrete floor. "He's getting smashed to pieces at that school. Bullies. The kind that hunt in packs." He described what he saw, not with anger now, but with a painful, clear detail that made a few of the men shift in their seats. He told them what his son said, about the teacher, the vice principal, the way they blamed him for his own home situation. A low grumble went through the room. They all knew what home situation was code for. It was a slap at all of them. "I went to the fence," Grinder continued, his voice growing stronger. "I saw it, and I know if I go down there and lean on some pencil-pushing vice principal, it just makes it worse for my kid. They'll say he's a snitch with a violent old man. They'll make him pay for it." He looked around the room, making eye contact with each man. "This ain't a job for one of us. This is a job for all of us." They didn't see one biker's kid. They saw a problem they could ignore. "I want to make it so they can't look away." A big man in the corner, a mechanic with arms like tree trunks, spoke up. "What are you thinking, brother? We can't exactly roll up and crack heads in a middle school. Cops would love that." "No heads," Grinder said, shaking his head. "No sreds. Not even a word. We don't give them that. We give them a picture. One they can't explain away." He laid it out. It was simple, almost too simple. No violence. No shouting. Just a show of presence. A silent, unmovable fact parked right outside their safe little world. The president leaned back, stroking his beard. "You're asking for a lot of brothers on a weekday morning. For a school. I'm asking for my son," Grinder said, and the plain truth of it hung in the air. Another brother, an older guy who'd done time and come out quieter, spoke. "My sister's kid got bullied. Drove him to a bad place. The school did nothing then, too. Just talked about conflict resolution." He spat the words out. "I'm in." One by one, the nods came. A few made calls, sending texts to nearby chapters, to friends who rode with other patches but lived by the same basic rules. The message wasn't a call to arms. It was a call to witness. A brother's kid is in the dirt, and the school kicked him there. "You in?" The responses started ticking back in. A yes from the next town over. Another from the city chapter. A few old-timers who hardly rode anymore said they'd be there. They were grandfathers now. This kind of thing struck a different chord. By the end of the meeting, the president had a rough count. Looks like 90, maybe 100 brothers can make it. You got a plan for this picture? Grinder nodded. We show up. We line up. We sit. We don't move. We don't talk to anyone but the head of the school. We let them see the number. We let them do the math. He paused. We look like what we are, but we act like what we have to be. For a kid. The meeting broke up. The usual backslapping and joking was absent. There was a grim, focused energy in the room. This wasn't a party run. This was a mission. As Grinder walked out to his bike, one of the younger brothers, a hothead usually, fell in beside him. Grinder, your kid, he gonna be okay with this? All of us showing up. Grinder thought about his son's tired, defeated face. Then he thought about the message it would send, not just to the school but to the boy, that he wasn't alone, that an army of uncles he never knew he had would appear out of nowhere to stand for him. He will be, Grinder said, firing up his engine. After tomorrow. The morning air was cool and carried the smell of damp earth. Felt like any other Tuesday. Grinder hadn't slept much. He'd spent the night going over the plan in his head, again and again, looking for cracks. He made coffee in the quiet of his small apartment, the silence feeling heavy. Today, everything would change. He dressed carefully, jeans, boots, his plain black t-shirt. He saved the leather cut, his colors, for last. He ran his fingers over the worn patches, the club logo, the rockers. Today, this vest wasn't just about who he was. It was about what he could do. It was armor. He met the first group at a truck stop on the highway, just outside of town. 5 bikes, then 10. Their engines a quiet, grumbling conversation in the pre-dawn gray. They didn't talk much. Nods were exchanged, cigarettes were lit. These were men who understood action better than words. More headlights appeared in the distance, coming from the east and the west, converging on the meeting point. Soon, the parking lot was full of motorcycles and men, a sea of leather and denim. The low rumble was a constant now, a vibration you could feel in your chest. Grinder moved through the crowd, shaking hands, clasping shoulders. He saw faces he hadn't seen in years, older brothers who'd ridden from 2 counties over. He saw the president who pulled him aside. We got 97 confirmed, he said, his voice low. All patched, all know the rules. Engines running until we hit the school zone, then kill him. We park, we sit, we don't engage. You and 2 others go to the door. That's it. This is a show, not a fight. Grinder nodded. It's a show they've never seen before. As the sun began to properly light the sky, painting it in pale oranges and blues, the president gave the signal. One by one, then in a wave, the engines roared to life. The sound was incredible, a deep, rolling thunder that shook the windows of the truck stop. It wasn't the sound of anger. It was the sound of purpose. They formed up into a double column, a slow-moving procession of iron and will. Grinder took his place near the front, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. They rolled through the waking suburbs. Curtains twitched in windows. A man collecting his newspaper froze on his lawn, his coffee mug halfway to his mouth. In cars, people slowed to a crawl, their eyes wide, phones coming up to take pictures. This wasn't a sight this neighborhood had ever seen. It was like watching a documentary about some other place come to life on their quiet street. They turned onto the final road, the one that led to the middle school. The lead riders slowed, and as one, the roaring symphony of engines cut out. The sudden silence was almost louder than the noise had been. Now there was only the sound of tires on asphalt, and the faint squeak of leather as 97 men guided their heavy machines. They lined the bikes up along the entire block in front of the school, a solid, immovable wall of chrome and black. The men stayed seated, hands on their handlebars or folded across their chests. They didn't look at the school. They just looked ahead, calm, still. It was this stillness that was the most powerful thing. It wasn't a riot. It was a blockade of pure presence. The school. The morning routine shattered. The first buses, which had just arrived, stopped dead. Kids pressed their faces against the windows, their mouths open in shock. Teachers on morning duty herded students inside quickly, their faces pale. In the front office, panic erupted. The secretary looked out, gasped, and ran to the principal's door. Inside the principal's office, Mr. Alvarez was just starting his day with a cup of tea. He saw the look on his secretary's face first. Then he looked out the window. The color drained from his face. His mind, trained for fire drills and parent-teacher complaints, had no file for this. This was something from a movie. He saw the vice principal, Mr. Brackett, standing frozen in the hallway, staring out the glass doors, a stack of papers trembling in his hand. Grinder took a deep breath. He swung his leg off his bike. Two of the older, most respected brothers from his chapter dismounted with him. They fell in beside him, not as bodyguards, but as witnesses. The three men walked, slowly and deliberately, across the sidewalk toward the school's main entrance. Their boots echoed on the concrete. The only sound in the entire world seemed to be the jingle of the chain on Grinder's wallet and the distant cry of a single bird. They stopped at the front door. Grinder could see the terrified faces of staff through the glass. He didn't try to open it. He just waited. After a long moment, with a soft buzz, the electric lock disengaged. The door was opened a crack by a custodian, his eyes wide. "We're here to see Principal Alvarez," Grinder said, his voice calm and clear in the quiet morning air. "And Mr. Brackett. It's about a student. It's time we talked." The principal's office felt like a fishbowl. Sunlight streamed in through the large window, perfectly framing the unbelievable scene outside. From where Principal Alvarez sat, it looked less like a street and more like an invasion of leather and metal. He could feel the weight of every single gaze from the men on those bikes, even though none of them were looking in. Mr. Brackett, the vice principal, stood stiffly by the bookcase, his face slick with a thin layer of sweat. The two men were used to being in charge in this room. Today they weren't. Grinder and the two brothers who entered with him didn't sit down. They stood, a solid wall of quiet intention. The older brother on Grinder's right, a man with a long gray beard, simply leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, blocking the exit without a word. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. This conversation was happening until it was finished. Grinder placed a single object on the principal's polished desk. It wasn't a weapon. It was a small, blue, cloth-covered notebook, the corners worn soft. His son's diary. "I think you know my boy," Grinder began, his voice low and even. He didn't shout. The quiet in the room made his words carry more weight than a yell ever could. "He's been coming to you for help. For months." Principal Alvarez opened his mouth, a rehearsed line about protocols on his lips, but Grinder continued, cutting him off gently but firmly. "He told Mr. Brackett here about the stealing, the shoving, the names. He was told to toughen up. He was told his home situation might be making him sensitive." Grinder let the phrase hang in the air. He looked directly at the vice principal, who couldn't meet his eye. "You saw a last name. You saw a story you thought you knew. And you decided his pain wasn't your problem." Mr. Brackett found his voice, thin and shaky. "Now, see here, we have procedures for these matters. We can't just act on every accusation." "I'm not here about an accusation," Grinder said, his eyes still on the principal. "I'm here about what I saw with my own eyes. Yesterday, at your fence, while your teachers were on duty. 3 of your students had my son cornered. They dumped his belongings. They put their hands on him. It was happening right under your roof." He tapped the notebook with a thick finger. "It's all in here. Every day. Every time. Every time he asked for help and didn't get it." He finally moved his gaze to the window, to the line of motorcycles and men. "Those men out there? They're not a gang. They're a family. And you failed one of their own. You didn't protect a child in your care. So they came to see why." Principal Alvarez found his voice, though it was weaker than he intended. This display is intimidation. We can't have a conversation under these conditions." The older brother at the door spoke for the first time, his voice a dry rasp. The only intimidation happening was in your schoolyard. We're just parked. We're real good at waiting. Grinder leaned forward, just slightly, his hands on the desk. Here's what's going to happen. No one out there moves a muscle until we have an understanding. First, the 3 boys who did this are suspended. Effective today. Not a talk.
À suspension.
Their parents get a full report on every single incident in this book. Second, you're bringing in a real anti-bullying program. Not a poster in the hall. A real one with people from outside this district to run it. Your staff gets trained, from the teachers to the janitors. Third, he said, looking at Brackett, this man is removed from any student safety decisions. Permanently. He showed his judgment, and it was rotten. And fourth, Grinder finished, standing straight again, you will appoint a person, a counselor, a social worker, someone, to check in with my son every single day for the rest of the year. Not to ask him what's wrong, but to make sure he knows someone in this building sees him. And that person reports to me and to his mother weekly. A third party can sit in on those calls if you want. The list was precise, reasonable, and utterly non-negotiable. It wasn't the demands of a hothead. It was the blueprint of a father who had thought of nothing else all night. Principal Alvarez looked from Grinder's stony face to the vice principal's terrified one. Then back out the window at the silent, waiting army. He understood now. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a correction. They had created this situation through neglect, and this was the consequence, parked on their doorstep. The cost of doing nothing had just become visible, and it was 97 men deep. And if we agree to these terms? Alvarez asked quietly. Then my brothers and I have a long ride home, Grinder said. And you get to go back to running a school. One that actually protects kids. Alvarez looked at the little blue notebook. He imagined the boy writing in it, night after night, documenting a hurt the school had ignored. He looked at the line of motorcycles, an impossible problem he couldn't suspend or counsel away. The choice was stark and simple. He took a deep, shuddering breath and reached for his phone. I need to call the district superintendent, he said, and then we have some phone calls to make to parents. He didn't agree out loud. He didn't have to. He had just started doing the work. The silence outside was beginning to feel like a physical thing, a heavy blanket over the street. Inside the office, the only sounds were the nervous tap of a pen from the vice principal and the low murmur of Principal Alvarez on the phone with the school district superintendent. Grinder and the 2 brothers didn't move. They were statues, letting the pressure of the quiet and the sight outside do all the talking. Through the window, Grinder could see the scene holding perfectly still. Kids were pressed against the upper-floor classroom windows, their faces tiny ovals of shock. Teachers had given up trying to pull the blinds. They just stood there, watching too. The first police cruiser had arrived a few minutes ago, 2 officers getting out. They'd taken one look at the line of 97 silent bikers, had a brief, tense conversation with the chapter president who sat calmly on his bike, and then the officers had just leaned against their car. They understood. This wasn't a riot. There was no noise, no property damage, no threat. There was just a massive, undeniable presence. What were they going to do? Arrest everyone for illegal parking? The principal hung up the phone. He looked older, the weight of the morning settling on his shoulders. The superintendent is aware of the situation, he said, choosing his words like he was walking on broken glass. He has advised us to resolve this matter with the concerned parents. He couldn't bring himself to say the word. He looked at Grinder. We will comply with your terms. The students in question are being pulled from class now. Their parents are being called. We will begin the process for a new counseling program immediately. Grinder gave a single, slow nod. It wasn't a nod of thanks. It was a nod of acknowledgement. And him? He asked, tilting his head toward the vice principal. Alvarez followed his gaze. Mr. Brackett had been the author of so much of this, with his dismissive sighs and his toughen-up lectures. Effective immediately, Mr. Brackett will be on administrative leave. Pending a full review, he will be reassigned to central office duties, away from any student contact. It was over. They had won without a single raised fist or shouted curse. The relief that washed through Grinder was so strong it felt like a wave, threatening to buckle his knees for a second. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. He picked up the small blue notebook from the desk, holding it carefully. This was the only thing that mattered. He turned to leave. "A question," Principal Alvarez said, his voice barely above a whisper. He gestured weakly toward the window. How do we get them to leave?" Grinder almost smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You started doing your job. They'll know." He walked out of the office, the two brothers falling in behind him. The walk through the silent school hallway felt longer than the walk in. Every classroom door window had faces in it. The fear was gone from the adults' eyes, replaced by a kind of stunned awe. The kids just looked amazed. They stepped back out into the sunlight. The air was still quiet, but it felt different now. The tension had a leak in it. Grinder walked up to the chapter president, still sitting on his bike. He didn't yell. He just said quietly, "It's done." They agreed to everything. The president's stern face softened just a fraction. He gave a grunt of approval. Then he turned his head and made a simple hand signal. A flat palm patted downward twice in the air. It moved down the line like a slow wave. One by one, the brothers kicked their stands down and dismounted. There was a collective creak of leather, the sound of boots hitting pavement. They stretched, they lit cigarettes, they spoke in low tones for the first time all morning. The spell was broken. The men began to mount up again. This time, there was no single, thunderous roar. Engines coughed to life in ones and twos, a gradual, rumbling crescendo. They weren't a military column anymore. They were just a large group of men going home. S. Grinder swung his leg over his own bike. He looked up one last time at the school. In a third-floor window, he saw a single small face, not pressed against the glass with the others, but standing back a little. It was his son. The boy's hand was raised. Not a big wave, just fingers slightly lifted from the sill. His face wasn't crying. It wasn't even smiling yet. It was just clear. For the first time in months, it wasn't clouded with fear. Grinder nodded, just once, up at that window. "I see you. It's over." He turned the key. The engine growled to life beneath him, and he pulled away from the curb, falling into place in the middle of the pack as they rumbled slowly down the street, leaving a silent, changed school behind them. The story, of course, did not end with the roar of the engines fading away. Stories like that never do in a small town. Spread not as a police report, but as a legend. Parents whispered about it at soccer practice. Teachers talked about it in hushed tones in the break room. The local newspaper ran a careful, vague article about a large, organized motorcycle group conducting a peaceful demonstration to address student safety concerns. Everyone knew the truth, but the official words danced around it. The power wasn't in the details being shouted. It was in them being quietly known. At the school, things changed with a speed that made previous inaction seem ridiculous. The three bullies were gone, suspended for a week pending a longer investigation. They didn't come back swaggering. When they returned, they were shadows moved to different homerooms. The message had been received by everyone. The rules applied to them, too. A team from a county-wide anti-bullying nonprofit showed up the very next week, holding assemblies and training sessions that were, for once, dead serious. Teachers learned new words like bystander intervention and restorative justice. And more importantly, they learned they would be held accountable for using them. For Grinder's son, the change was in the air he breathed. The hallways felt wider. The lunchroom felt quieter. The constant, gnawing dread in his stomach, the one he'd carried like a second backpack, began to ease. He wasn't suddenly popular. He was still the quiet kid. But he was left alone. The new counselor, a woman with kind eyes and no connection to the old staff, checked in with him every afternoon, just as promised. She didn't ask leading questions. She just asked how his day was, and for the first time he could answer honestly. It was okay. At home, the truce between his parents shifted. His mother, who had been so angry and afraid, saw the results. The boy was eating again. He was sleeping through the night. He talked about a project at school, not about being afraid to go. She didn't thank Grinder, not in so many words, but the sharp edge was gone from her voice when they spoke on the phone. The schedule for visits became a little more flexible, a little less like a court order. Back at the clubhouse, life returned to normal, but a new kind of normal. The brothers didn't pat themselves on the back much. That wasn't their style. But the story was told, late at night over beers, not as a war story, but as a different kind of tale. The younger guys, the ones who thought being tough meant being loud, they listened. They heard how 97 men had moved a mountain without throwing a single punch. They saw the quiet respect in the older members' eyes when Grinder walked in. It became part of their code, unspoken but understood. You protect your family. All of it. Even the quiet, bookish parts of it that live in a different world. A month after the morning at the school, Grinder picked up his son for a weekend. They didn't do anything special. They worked on an old car engine in Grinder's driveway, the boy handing him tools, learning the names of parts. The grease on their hands was real. The task simple as they wiped their hands on old rags. His son looked up at him, the late afternoon sun in his eyes. "Dad?" he said, his voice casual. "Some of the kids at school, they think what you did was kinda cool."
Grinder grunted, tightening a bolt.
"It wasn't about being cool." "I know," the boy said quickly. Then, after a pause, he added, "But it was, in the end, it was, they see me different now." Grinder stopped and looked at his son. The hollows under his eyes were gone. He stood a little straighter. "How do they see you?" The boy thought about it, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time in a long time. "Like I matter," he said simply. Grinder nodded, looking back at the engine. His throat felt tight. That was all he had ever wanted. Not for himself to be feared, but for his child to be safe. To matter. The roar of the bikes had been loud, but the silence that followed, the peace his son now carried, was the real victory. That Sunday night, when he dropped his son back home, their goodbye was easy. No lingering dread about the Monday to come. Just a wave, and a "see you next weekend, Dad." Grinder rode home alone, the single headlight of his bike cutting through the dark. The wind was cool, the road familiar. He wasn't just a rider anymore. He was a father who had ridden to the edge of his world and back for his kid. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he would do it again in a heartbeat. The school had been shut down, not with violence, but with the sheer, undeniable weight of a love that refused to be quiet.